stayed during the conclave and turned down the palatial papal quarters in favor of a more modest residence at the Vatican. He also began speaking frankly about modern issues, famously saying, "Who am I to judge?" when asked about the sexual orientation of priests. During Holy Week ceremonies, he shocked traditionalists by washing the feet of women and non-Catholics. For his first international trip, the Holy Father traveled to his native continent, South America, visiting Brazil, the world's most Catholic country, for World Youth Day. Celebrating Mass before 3 million people on Rio de Janeiro's famed Copacabana beach. Passionate about the environment, his signature encyclical Laudato Si outlined how global warming hurts the less fortunate around the world. He took a pilgrimage to North America, first stopping in Cuba, saying Mass to thousands.
At the home of the brave.
Then on to the United States, addressing a joint session of Congress and visiting with President Barack Obama at the White House. In New York, he spoke before the United Nations General Assembly and held Mass at Madison Square Garden.
In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
In the city of brotherly love, Philadelphia, he attended the World Meeting of the Families Festival and met privately with victims of sex abuse. Francis also defended Islam while condemning the terror group ISIS. In the wake of the deadly terror attacks on Christmas in Egypt, Francis traveled to Cairo, extending the hand of fellowship to Muslims. Francis also became the first pope to visit Iraq on March 5, 2021. On his trip, he met with Iraq's top Ayatollah and urged peace. At the age of 84, his health started to decline, first undergoing surgery to remove part of his colon for what the Vatican described as a planned procedure, and later suffering from a small fracture in his knee. During a trip to Canada, the Pope required the help of a wheelchair and walker, telling reporters he could no longer travel like he used to and may possibly retire one day. In late 2022, his predecessor, Pope Benedict, died, marking the end of an unprecedented 9-year-long arrangement of two popes, living side by side in the Vatican gardens. Pope Francis presided over Benedict's funeral and said losing Benedict felt like he had lost a dad. Francis continued to battle opposition as he worked to make the Catholic Church more inclusive. He said he welcomed the criticism because it meant there was freedom to speak. His priestly motto had always been a Latin phrase that recognizes God's mercy and sovereignty, a sentiment that guided his ministry and will now be his legacy. In New York, Lauren Green, Fox News.
And that's the life and legacy of the Pope, who just passed away at the age of 88 years old. Jonathan Marrs helping us out almost since the news broke, and he joined us now as a Fox News contributor. Your thoughts first, for people who didn't see you on Fox News first, how your process is.
Well, just yesterday I was here, Emily and Charlie were here as well, yesterday morning, Easter Sunday, and we saw this as Pope Francis rejuvenated right after 5 weeks in the hospital, which the doctor said he had 2 life-threatening moments. And here he is back in St. Peter's Square, actually not only coming out on the balcony, but going around the square and then meeting with Vice President Vance, right after having been told by the doctors, don't meet with anyone, 2 months of convalescence. He still went and met with 70 prisoners. He went to meet with the healthcare workers from the hospital who had taken care of him.
Almost infection is almost inevitable.
You know what? Yes. And I think he knew that, right? And he decided, I'm going to do this. And, so, yes, shock when I got the phone call this morning at 3:30, shock, but also happy that he didn't have to go through a lot more suffering.
Do you want to hear this, Jonathan?
The bells will toll in St. Peter's Square to mark a pope's death. How many times does this ring, and what must the attendees be feeling right now, Father Jonathan, especially many who were there yesterday to celebrate the resurrection and perhaps now are returning the day after to mourn the loss of Pope Francis?
Yeah, I'm thinking it's 12:19 p.m. in Rome, high noon. People have started to gather because they just want to go and be someplace that's of importance, right? People are going to rush to the square as well when the new pope is elected, probably 2 weeks or so from now. But they're there now gathering in prayer. There's nothing to see. Yes, there's the tolling of the bells. Nothing to see, but just people from around the world saying, "I want to be at the center of it."
To gather. And one of the most beautiful things about the church is that it's that these traditions are thousands of years old, and of course, when the church started, you didn't have television, you didn't have Twitter, you had to toll the bells in order to alert everybody that something had happened.
Great point.
And so they gather there.
Yeah, they're gathering, and I think of all of the Protestant and evangelical viewers of Fox right now looking and like, well, I'm not Catholic. What does this mean to me? Why does this matter? Let me tell you, I really do believe it matters for our country and for the world, whether you're Catholic or not, because there's no other figure in the world that can say, I speak universally for 1.2 billion people, and not only Catholics, but also just standing up for the Bible, standing up for traditional Christianity, standing up for conservative values. Okay, we could say, yeah, Pope Francis wasn't all that conservative. Listen, he was very conservative compared to what the world is living right now. He's very conservative compared to so many other ideologies that would be anti-biblical. Anti-Christianity. He stood up for the resurrection of Jesus yesterday and said, we believe that this is true. This is not myth. This is not just history of people's fables. No, this is fact. That's pretty conservative.
Yeah. Right. So earlier you were talking to Carly and Brian, and you were explaining what is the purpose of the Pope, and I thought that was so fascinating. What is the Pope's job?
It's not primarily operational. It's not primarily organizational. It's not primarily policy making. It's to say, this is what the Bible teaches. This is what the church teaches. This is what tradition and the Bible have taught us about the mystery of life and death. So his life, especially at the end, right? He was not able to write a lot. He was not even able to speak a lot. But it was the images of a man who said, I am dying, and I believe that this is a passing from one element of life to another dimension, and that is eternal life in heaven.
So, but as I mentioned too, is that, okay, your goal is to set the tone as the Pope and let everybody else do the operational things. I understand that. But the interpretation, if everybody's interpretation of the Bible is the same, we wouldn't have millions of Bible studies around the world, right? The way people interpreted the Bible 200 years ago was different than what they do today. The power of the Pope was different. It was more of a political figure as much as a religious figure early on, correct? So how do you, when you put a Pope in place, are you adopting his interpretation of the Bible?
Let me tell you how Catholic theology would explain that, Brian. I know you're a deep theologian yourself.
Well, I don't like to brag about it, and no one can find that in my resume.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
Okay. Well, the Pope, yes, has universal authority, even over very practical decision making, like who's going to be the next Bishop of New York, Archbishop of New York, or in the Congo, or wherever. Very, very important decision making. But in the end, Catholic teaching says that the Pope, as a witness to the faith and a teacher, a custodian of the faith, that the Holy Spirit will make sure that he doesn't do anything that goes against fundamental teachings of the Bible and of the church. And so that's his main role, is to teach. And while he has lots of other responsibilities, that is his primary role.
But for example, people disagree with his interpretation of the Bible.
Yes.
Including you.
Yes.
You brought that before, right?
Yeah, of course.
So,
I've had lots of reasons to disagree with Pope Francis's way of governing the church. Sometimes I would wish he would have been more clear about certain things. He would take lots of topics, even important, controversial topics, and kind of throw things up at the wall to see what would stick, or at least that's how it came across. What he was trying to do was start conversations. He honestly did not change very many things in the Catholic Church, but he started a lot of conversations. And I think he, in his humility, and I believe he was genuinely a humble guy. Even if people thought he was a dictator, a lot of conservatives in the United States write to me and like, he's terrible, he's a dictator. Listen, you might not agree with everything that he said or did, but I don't think anybody can say this guy was not genuine and that he was not truly living what he believed the gospel taught.
And when you talk about that impact and the universality of the church, we were speaking earlier about his 10th consistory, and in December, when he appointed so many cardinals, specifically sought to broaden the geographic diversity of the College of Cardinals. And so just in December, 2 from Asia, for example, 2 from Africa, the Archbishop of Abidjan, Ivory Coast, and the Bishop of Algiers, Algeria. And here's my point, that now Cardinal Dogbo said there hasn't been an African pope, but it's a possibility in the church. And he said, I think that this eventuality, which is not necessarily a demand, but if this eventuality were to arise, the universal church would have to be ready to take it on. Do you feel that the imprint of Pope Francis on the College of Cardinals, in that, as you were saying earlier, almost the most political, do you think that that will have an impact in that of the Pope?
Of course it will have an impact, because he has named more than half of the people who are going to be electing the next pope. Of course it'll have a very direct impact. But let me warn you here. The fact that he named all of these people himself, right, does that mean that all of the people that he named really agree with some of his more political or social tendencies?
Pope Francis died on Holy Monday, Easter Monday, really it's called, Easter Monday,
or even Italian politics.
day after Easter Sunday,
Serving the poor and being at a very
2025. If you're going against medical advice, not to go out in public, and he went out in public anyways, even though he's sick, and he only had one lung, and
there's a cutoff at which the Cardinals can't vote anymore within the conclave.
pray
you
for
have to be under the age of 80. As soon as
the
you're
Pope
80,
and the
you're
world.
not voting anymore. It's fascinating.
It's like presidents in the Supreme Court. You want to get them young.
Hey, we have lots of conversations about voting rights in the United States, and paper ballots versus electronic. It's a really simple process, and it's very clear how the next pope is elected. All cardinals under the age of 80 go into a room. They have paper ballots. They have to get to 2/3 majority, and there's witnesses of exactly what happens.
And just think, he took 3 rounds. It probably was easier because they were just there for Benedict relatively recently, so maybe they had some type of relationship. Now it's been 13 years.
Yeah, and everyone says, that he was he almost got elected instead of Pope Benedict XVI.
Yeah.
He was he was the second one, and I think he was relieved they got to go back to Argentina and do what he likes to do. And then Benedict XVI resigns, back to the conclave, and everyone had their eye on him. And he surprised a lot of people because he was considered to be a very conservative Jesuit. Very concerned, and then all of a sudden he went a little different.
Yeah, once you got the job, he went a little off schedule. So, Jonathan Morris, would you stick around for a little while?
My pleasure.
All right, we'll check in with you again, and you have full access to the green room. World leaders, and meanwhile world leaders are paying tribute to Pope Francis. The White House saying, rest in peace, Pope Francis. While Vice President J.D. Vance expressed his condolences right on X, saying, quote, my heart goes out to the millions of Christians all over the world who loved him. I was happy to see him yesterday, though he was obviously very ill. May God rest his soul.
Israeli President Isaac Herzog praising the Pope as a man of deep faith, saying this, quote, he rightly saw great importance in fostering strong ties with the Jewish world and in advancing interfaith dialogue as a path toward greater understanding and mutual respect.
French President Macron saying, from Buenos Aires to Rome, Pope Francis wanted the church to bring joy and hope to the poorest. May it unite people with each other and with nature. All right, more leaders weighing in. King Charles expressing his sorrow, writing, quote, His Holiness will be remembered for his compassion, his concern for unity of the church, and for his tireless commitment to the common causes of all people of faith. He profoundly touched the lives of many.
And finally, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni dedicating this message to Pope Francis. Quote, I had the privilege of enjoying his friendship, his advice, and his teachings, which never failed, even in moments of trial and suffering.
All right, let's bring in to my immediate left, Father Gerald Murray, Catholic priest right here in New York. Father, great to see you.
Thank you, Brian.
Can't be totally surprised at 88 years old, suffering from illness. But when you saw him yesterday, you thought, well, man, he's going to be okay for a while. Why else would he be there on Easter Sunday?
Yeah, the Pope very much wanted to be out there, and I saw him and I was saying, my goodness, he's really recovered a lot of strength and energy. He got in the Pope-mobile, and they travel around St. Peter's Square. They brought babies up to him to touch and to kiss. And I said, my goodness, he's putting a strain on himself, but he looks pretty good. So I was shocked when I got the phone call this morning saying he passed away.
Father, talk to us about the symbolism, as we've been talking earlier, about him passing after the conclusion of Holy Week, the conclusion of Resurrection Sunday, which to practicing Christians, the holiest of days for us, with the knowledge that with acceptance of Jesus Christ as our Lord and Savior, his death, his sacrifice for our sins, for the mercy and forgiveness that we do not deserve, but we certainly receive. Talk to us about that symbolism.
Yeah, it's, the Pope was going through his Good Friday, in the hospital for 38 days, and then he came out, and it looked like it's sort of like a resurrection physically. But he's 88 years old. And part of the realism of Christianity is we know Good Friday, Easter Sunday, they all go together. So for us, for him to die on Easter Monday, sort of like we celebrated the resurrection of Christ, now we entrust the soul of the Pope, who's the vicar of Christ, to God's hands and say, give him eternal life. It's a fulfillment of our theology. Death is not something we fear, it's something we get ready for.
So it was a recovery, but he just left his body behind.
Well, the soul goes into the hands of God exactly for judgment.
So obviously, famously, the Pope came to visit the United States back in 2015. Tell us about your memories of that.
Yes, I was in a parish near the UN at the time, St. Holy Family Church, right on 47th Street. So we had all our CCD kids, the catechism students, out on the steps of Trump World Tower, because that's where the Pope came right by. And we waved to the Pope, and he saw us, and it was nice. He was in a little Fiat.
How did he know it was Trump Tower?
Everybody knows Trump Tower, And but he came by and he went to the UN, and it's kind of touching because he's going to speak to world leaders, but there were all these kids, First Communion and confirmation students, waving to the Pope. So we had a great time then. And then I followed that trip pretty closely. I was doing some commentary for Fox and others. And the Pope, I think, was shocked how great a reception he got. It's kind of known that the Pope and America didn't have the best relationship. You're a little skeptical of capitalism, and he didn't think the American way of life necessarily should be imitated. But once he got to New York, I don't know if you remember the crowds in Central Park and down Fifth Avenue and at St. Patrick's. So, America's a land of faith, and I think that really impressed the Pope.
Yeah, it's amazing, too. It's like with all the different opportunities to explore communism, socialism, he said capitalism was the problem. And also, he was kind of tied with the Russian Orthodox Church, which basically sold their soul to Vladimir Putin, which is an interesting situation. But I remember Cardinal Dolan said he was standing next to the Pope, and he loved that St. Patrick's was in the middle of the city. He says he's used to churches being kind of the outskirts, you go to it. He loved it being right in the middle and being struck by it. It's almost as if it caught him by surprise.
Yeah, the Pope had not visited America during his years as Archbishop of Buenos Aires, so he was struck by that. And, the nice thing about when you come to a place like St. Patrick's Cathedral, you realize Catholicism is a lot bigger than any one person. And the Pope is the head Catholic in the world, but there he came and he found all these people, all walks of life, everybody was there. It was a beautiful moment.
Father, what are your thoughts on the impact that he made physically on the volume of believers? So as we talk about his visit to the United States, the historic first with the president meeting and the UN, the Philly open air Spanish-speaking mass, and the 3 million that came to the Rio de Janeiro mass of his in Copacabana, and the start of those first that he really, it seems, had a physical impact of just people flocking to his masses and holding them. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think people say that religion is dying in the world. I disagree. I think religion is always on the topic people are interested in. And Catholicism, for Catholics, of course, the Pope is our father, the Holy Father, we call him. But for everybody, for non-Catholic Christians and other believers, the Pope represents God's presence in the world. And we do it confidently, and we do it with the sense of saying, we're here as representatives of Jesus, and the message of Jesus is true. You were talking about Bible studies earlier, Brian. People love to find out, what did Jesus say and do, and what does it mean? And I think going to see the Pope was, for a lot of people, a renewal of their faith. And for me, as a priest in New York, it's very encouraging. You know, we are not an atheist country. We're not a city of doubters and disbelievers. People looking for meaning.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, too, to think that we were on the couch talking in 2013 about how historic it was that Pope Benedict was resigning. And he was still in good, decent health. And they thought that was somewhat of a crisis moment, because they felt like the church was going in the wrong direction. Was he pushed out? Was there a sense that they needed to change gears?
No, I've studied that topic because, you know, it's of great interest to us. No, Pope Benedict really was a reluctant pope. You know, he was the second in command of John Paul II for so many years. And then when he got elected pope, it was a continuity thing. The cardinal said, we're going to take number 2 and make him number 1. But the Pope Benedict really liked to write. He was a professor. So I think he found it difficult to do all of the management. And it's known that there were a lot of scandals in the Vatican. He had difficulty dealing with them. So in a sense, it was a crisis because Pope Benedict resigned and he lived for 10 more years, you know, and he lived at the Vatican. Yeah. And Pope Francis and he had a good relationship. They didn't agree on everything, but they respected and loved each other. But no, the Catholic Church since John Paul II has gone a little bit through a roller coaster because, you know, John Paul II, communism falls, then Benedict comes along, more continuity, and Pope Francis comes along. And, you know, he was more socialistic in his economic thinking, and he also emphasized, you know, free immigration. He emphasized environmentalism. These are things that were kind of different. And then on the doctrinal issue, just talking to Jonathan Morris, you know, he had an openness. He had blessing of gay couples. He had divorced and remarried people getting communion. These are things that no pope had ever done. So right now, I think the next few weeks, we're going to see big discussion. Do we want to go in the same line, or do we want to return to a more John Paul II Benedict style?
So what happens next?
Well, now the body will be prepared for the funeral. It's the funeral mass. The cardinals will decide. It'll probably be within 4 to 6 days. And then after that, there's going to be a period of approximately 10 days where the cardinals will meet together. Cardinals are over 80, and there are 114 of them. They can participate in the initial discussions, and each one gets to give a speech and talk about priorities. But then there are 138 voting cardinals. They will go to the Sistine Chapel, and then we'll see.
And you'll be around to help us understand all of it every step of the way. Father Gerald Murray, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Stick around.
Pope Francis, the first Latin American pope, dead at 88. That legacy, just ahead.
So he was born in 1936 and he passed today, tragically, 2025. He was 88 years old. Pope Francis dead. We'll find a different channel here where we can find more on that.
That's more.
Here we
Leonard
go.
Whiplash, slamming America's heartland.
It was made on that.
So Pope Francis rather passed away.
God loves us as we are, and for the strength that each one of us has to fight for our dignity. Being homosexual is not a crime. It's not a crime, yes, but it's a sin. First, let's distinguish sin from crime. It is also a sin to lack charity with one another. And Francis went on to suggest that being gay is natural, a view unimaginable from any previous pope. Every man and woman must have a window in their life where they can turn their hope and where they can see the dignity of God, Francis said. And being homosexual isn't a crime. It's a human condition. Pope Francis would go on to permit priests to bless same-sex couples in a new papal rule, a seismic change in Vatican policy. At the Vatican, he met privately with victims of sex abuse by the clergy. He angered Jews on his trip to the Holy Land by adding a visit to Israel's barrier wall, a gesture of solidarity with Palestinians. Francis reinforced a message of church unity when he canonized the more liberal Pope John the 23rd, along with more conservative Pope John Paul II. And joining him at the altar, his predecessor, former Pope Benedict XVI. Nearly 1 million Catholics crowded St. Peter's Square in jubilation. But for all the papal pageantry, Francis will be remembered most for his disarming humility and humor, his warmth with children, his compassion for the poor and the sick.
I would ask each of you, whatever your capacity, to care one another, be close to one another, respect one another. I bless each one of you from my heart.
Pope Francis leaves a legacy that is not so much hammered into doctrine through things he wrote, but really it shines forth from his witness, from the life he lived, from the way he reached out to people, the way, the most important word in his theology, he encountered them, be with them, get down from the high places of the church and be with them. Now the question going forward is, the church does move in doctrine, hammered out in writing. What will come next? Diane?
And Terry, I want to pull on that a little bit more because so many firsts with this Pope, not only the many you just mentioned, but the first Jesuit Pope, the first Pope from the Americas, the first Pope to take the name Francis. What do you think that means for his legacy?
Well, that he did want to break down some of the traditions, and the church is a deeply traditional place, and he was in his own way quite traditional. He was a pope who spoke openly about the reality of the devil in life. He was not someone who was a secular person by any means, but he did want the church to be less stuffy and less high and mighty, and be with the people who needed it the most, who needed the teachings of what he called the medicine of Jesus Christ in their lives. And I think that example is quite vivid to us today, but as we know, personalities kind of fade over time. The question coming forward is, what will the church do with that vivid legacy that the world treasures in many ways, but that is not, at this point, doctrine?
Terry, he was a surprise in so many ways as well. A lot of people were surprised to hear when he was elected Pope. He was planning to retire pretty shortly before that happened. What do you think this means for the conclave going forward?
Well, there's an old saying in the church that every conclave tries to correct the mistake of the previous one. They kind of rebalance. I think they're going to want a pope who's not quite so improvisational, right? You never quite knew day by day what you were getting with Pope Francis. That did come as a surprise. He himself seemed to be inspired by his election to the papacy. There were people in Argentina who were surprised to see him smile so much. They even called him, when he was the Archbishop in Buenos Aires, the sad Archbishop. It seemed to lift him up and made him trust his instincts. So look, I think, for a pope who's going to calm things down. A couple of years after he was elected a pope, one of the cardinals in Rome was heard to have said, "What have we done here? We have put a loaded weapon in the hands of a child." I think that's obviously an opponent of Pope Francis, but they're going to want, I think, a steadier hand at the till.
All right, our Terry Moran outside St. Matthew's Cathedral in D.C. Terry, thank you. And I want to bring in ABC News contributor Father John Walk on the phone, who was just at the Vatican this morning. Father John, what do you make of the timing here? Pope Francis making this appearance at Easter Mass. Some did not know if he would be there or not. And then not only does he make this appearance and give a blessing, goes around in the Pope-mobile, greets the crowd, and now we have here just the following morning hearing that the Pope has died at the age of 88.
No, it's astounding that the Pope's last public appearance would be Easter Sunday, with all the crowds and the whole world looking as he blessed the city and the world. The message Urbi et Orbi means that the blessing to the city and to the world for the last time, and the next morning he would be passing away. It's absolutely an amazing coincidence, if you want to call it, but I think it's providence. That it's a moment also of unity for the church. I think the church has brought together around the Pope, even people who might have disagreed with the Pope in some of his policies or things, or his approach. I think right now you feel in St. Peter's Square, where I am, is a great unity around the figure of the father of the church, of over 1 billion Catholics all over the world.
And Father Walk, when thinking about Pope Francis's successor, what does it mean for the fact that so many of the bishops who will be making this choice were appointed by him?
Well, it's hard to know what that means, between John Paul II and Benedict, they named a huge number of cardinals, and yet they were the ones who elected Pope Francis, and many people would not have expected Pope Francis to come out of that particular composition of the College of Cardinals, and yet it did. The bets are all off. When the Cardinals enter the conclave, no one really knows what's going to happen.
And I said bishops, I meant cardinals. Still early here on the East Coast, so forgive me for that.
That's right.
But I want to hear more about your thoughts on his impact, cultural issues, geopolitical issues. I mean, this Pope did not shy away from some tough situations here. How lasting do you think that legacy will be now that he's gone?
That's hard to say. It's a little early to make pronouncements about papal legacies. I think right now people are struggling to digest simply the fact that he's passing away. As I said, the feeling right now isn't so much analysis, but of allowing the heart of the church to be seen. But I think that there's many things that the Pope has done that are new but haven't been consolidated. So it's hard to know, his pronouncements about different matters in the world scene, sort of in politics, or things can change very quickly. And so I think it'd be rash to think that, just because the Pope said something, that's going to determine how the future is going to be with the papacy or in the world and society itself. So we have to wait and see on that.
And you talked about the heart of the Catholic Church, obviously people in mourning. What's it like at the Vatican today? I know you were just there this morning.
Yeah, that's where I am right now. I'm looking at the facade of St. Peter's. It's a little bit strange because today is a big holiday. It's a national holiday, and there's sort of a festive mood. Today, basically everyone goes out for a picnic. The day after Easter is called Pasquetta, the Little Easter. And so there's a holiday spirit. At the same time, with the bells tolling in St. Peter's Square, and people are walking around a little bit stunned by what's happened. They knew that the Pope was sick, and it shouldn't have come as a surprise, and yet, when it happens, you're not prepared. And for it to happen the day after Easter, when everyone is in a very joyous spirit, is a bit of a challenge, though I think, obviously, Easter is a celebration of the resurrection from the dead, so it's also fitting that the Pope's death should be joined so closely with the idea of resurrection.
And Father John, stay with me, but I want to bring in our foreign correspondent Marcus Moore, who was also there at the Vatican over the weekend for the Easter celebrations. Marcus, what do you make of the contrast of what you saw there all of last week and what we're about to see in the Vatican now with the Pope's passing?
Yeah, well, I think just as the father was speaking about, there's a sense of shock this morning. Certainly people were well aware of the Pope's health challenges that he was enduring and the fact that he was still recovering from pneumonia in both of his lungs. And he's spent 5 weeks at Rome's Gemelli Hospital receiving treatment for that. But even after his release, the expectation was, after enduring this type of illness, that he would be still require therapy and would take some time to recover fully. And so the fact that he has now passed away, in the sense of his health, it's not surprising, but just the timing is what is really shocking, certainly for people in particular who were there just yesterday and watched the Pope as he passed by on the Pope Mobile following Easter Sunday Mass. I was not expecting him to do that. We did not have details on his appearances. In fact, the expectation was that
It's actually 12:49 p.m. at the Vatican right now.
there was nothing scheduled throughout Holy Week. So for him to do that extended tour in the Pope Mobile yesterday was quite moving at the time, and even more so now for the thousands, Diane, who gathered outside the Vatican there to receive a blessing from the Pope and to see him. Throughout the weekend, we were there covering the Holy Week ceremonies, and I can tell you several people came up to us asking, will we see the Pope today? When will we see him? And so there was a level of anticipation and excitement. And I think the fact that the Pope was able to make an appearance on Easter Sunday, and he was able to speak, albeit briefly, he was able to introduce his Urbi et Orbi message that was then later read by the Master of Ceremonies. Just putting all of that together, I think it illustrates really what the Pope had wanted all along. He wanted to participate in Holy Week and be a part of this special time.
All right, our foreign correspondent Marcus Moore, Father John Walk, thank you both. And now I want to bring in our ABC News contributor and consultant to the Vatican, Helen Alvarez, for more. Helen, you heard Marcus and Father John there talking about the timing here, right? Pope Francis making this appearance at Easter Sunday, blessing the crowd, going through the crowd, and then just hours later we learn of his passing. What do you make of the significance of that, especially considering his sort of affectionate reputation as a workaholic? I mean, this is a Pope who was in the hospital, some, really wondering if he was going to be able to pull through from that double pneumonia. And even in the hospital, we were hearing he was working the moment he could.
Yes, you really can't overestimate the importance to Catholics and the joy of Easter Sunday. And his desire to be present to people probably was very much a product of that. I mean, it's a day when we ring bells, we sing songs, we throw on lights in the church in a really dramatic way. And he wanted to participate in that joy. I mean, he was kind of living out the day in, day out life of a Catholic and obligations of a priest.
He took on many causes, right? And tried to bring peace to war zones, talked about LGBTQ plus issues. He also took on immigration, seemed to be a lover of immigrants and migrants and sort of take on that cause. Where do you think that legacy goes from here? And what did you make of his impact on that front?
Yes, I mean, his desire to communicate that Jesus Christ is for everyone, that you cannot, as human beings, put a limit on the love of God. His desire to welcome everyone, and in particular, to lay on us as human beings, especially those who are privileged, a responsibility for those with less. It was extremely powerful part of his message. And he happened to be Pope at a time in the world where an enormous number of people were on the move. I think, historic numbers of people were fleeing desperate situations. And so to him, this was the exact Good Samaritan situation where Catholics and others had to be hypersensitive to the needs of those who were fleeing desperate situations.
Helen, he was also in a very unique position of being Pope while his predecessor was still alive, Pope Benedict, one of the few who actually retired as Pope. And Pope Benedict was there in the Vatican as well. What was their relationship like?
Yes, one always saw pictures of their cordial encounters. Considering that you have two of the most visible human beings in the world, it's a bit of a miracle that things were as peaceful as they were. And I think that was due to the determination of Pope Benedict to allow Pope to be the Pope, and also to Pope Francis to honor his predecessor, and to, again, assure the world that this was not a confusing or difficult situation, but that the Pope would carry on as people expected.
So, Helen, where do you see this going now? What do you think, the many people mourning the Pope want to see and hear from the Vatican now, and what happens in the days ahead?
Yeah, so
sad, very tragic.
There will be I believe, about 9 days of mourning for this pope, and that's you do need a great deal of time for a figure this public and this well known
They said
to
about
be
2
mourned
weeks
by
earlier.
the variety of peoples in the world who were aware of him. And then after that, the cardinals will gather at a conclave. They'll stay actually in the place where Pope Francis lives, Casa Sancta Marta, which was really built for this. And then they will go to the Sistine Chapel. They will vote, I think, up to 4, but ordinarily perhaps 2 times a day. They take a break after a couple of days. They have spiritual direction, they reconvene, they go again. I mean, this could be decided very quickly, or it could take, quite a bit of time. We don't know. We do know that there are many cardinals who are not terribly familiar with one another, having been appointed in great numbers in very recent times by the Pope and from very far-flung parts of the world. So it's going to be a super interesting conclave and very much in need of the guidance of the Holy Spirit because of the divergent persons who are part of the College of Cardinals.
Helen, how do you think technology impacts that now? In general, in the world, we have so much more information on any individual that we're interested in finding information on.
Yes.
How does that change for the cardinals who are now choosing the next pontiff?
That's an interesting question. I don't think I thought about that even with the last transition. The amount of sources that are characterizing different papabile, that is people who people think are most likely to be pope, is going to be really divergent. And if cardinals are consulting these sources, it's going to be really important that they look at a balanced array of them. I saw a summary some years ago out of Georgetown University of the way that bishops and cardinals digest the news, and it suggests that they digest a really wide variety. I think they're going to rely even more, however, on knowing one another, maybe from some of the gatherings of the synod that the Pope had, maybe from other interactions on international commissions. But if they are consulting the media, it's going to be really important not to take the opinion of one or another partisan too strongly.
And Helen, in addition to taking on some geopolitical issues, Pope Francis also took on the hierarchy of the church itself. And not so much in terms of particular roles, but in portraying that priests and bishops and cardinals, that they should be one with the people, that they should not look at themselves as, as being superior to them. Does that message seem to have resonated among the clergy in general, or is that something that may also be gone with Pope Francis himself?
That message has been very, very highly visible, really since Vatican II, where we, and the documents issued from the Vatican after that, that actually take on what we call clericalism, the sense that clerics are more valuable than others, both from within the church and also from lay people meaning non-clerics, who will tend to say, oh, I don't have a responsibility in the church, that's for those who are ordained. So Pope Francis, I think, continued the tradition begun very much during Vatican II of saying both to lay people, step up, you have a responsibility, as well as to clerics to say, please don't value your vocation as authoritarian, but understand that you are the servants of Christ, that is, all of those who profess the faith.
And among his many first, Pope Francis was also the first pope from the Americas, coming from Argentina. What did that mean for people in that region, and what does that mean going forward? Is that a factor in the conclave? Do they try to mix it up in that way?
I think it's quite possible. Again, we don't know for sure, but I think what you just said is highly possible. The person is formed from the place where they came, and the concern with the gap between the rich and the poor, the concern with immigration, his concern with family life, which is struggling in many parts of Latin America, undoubtedly were shaped by where he came from. When considering how to go forward on this, it is the case that in certain parts of the world, Catholicism is booming, and in certain parts of the world it's struggling. Will the Holy Spirit inspire the cardinals to have a representative from a part of the world where it's booming, and we want to know, what are you hearing? What is your relationship with Christ? How can we spread that to the rest of the world? Or to attend to parts of the world where Catholicism is struggling because of things like materialism and individualism and
Interesting.
other
Now let's
problems
switch to
of our
Fox News from
contemporary
ABC.
times.
The 9 News, it's not in.
Like Brown.
Yeah, some things are just better at home. With Empire's
And
Home
then
Floor Advantage,
back.
you can compare samples in your own.
Those are commercials.
We will be watching to see how he celebrated. Helen Alvarez, thank you. And again, we are looking at this breaking news of Pope Francis dying at the age of 88 years old. The Pope had just celebrated Easter Sunday. He had shown up to St. Peter's there, blessed the crowd, and then surprised the crowd by getting in the Pope Mobile, going around greeting the thousands and thousands of people who had come to see him. And now we are learning just hours later, Pope Francis has died at the age of 88. Our coverage continues on ABC News Live and abcnews.com. And for some of you, Good Morning America is next, so we'll return you now to your regular programming. And David Muir will have a lot more on world news tonight. And again, continuing coverage on ABC News Live. I'm Diane Macedo. Have a great.
I gotta find you guys more news. Come on. There we go.
Good morning. It is 4 a.m. on Monday, April 21st. We begin with breaking news from the Vatican. Here's a live look where people are starting to gather after learning that Pope Francis has passed away at the age of 88.
News of his death comes just hours after he appeared in St. Peter's Square, where he wished thousands of Catholics a happy Easter. In what would mark his final public appearance, the Pope waved from the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica, where his Easter message was read by an archbishop. He was then driven around the square in an open-air Pope Mobile, where he was greeted by tens of thousands of the faithful Catholics. The Pope had missed most Holy Week services following his recent bout with double pneumonia. Again, the Vatican confirming this morning that Pope Francis has died at the age of 88. And good morning to you once again. I'm Chris Shaw.
And I'm Megan Henderson. Sorry, I'm having some issues with my earpiece. We're going to have more on the Pope's passing coming up in just a moment. First, we want to get to your weather and traffic with Judge Henry. Good morning.
Good morning. Happy Monday. Hope everyone had a nice Easter weekend. We're going to
Monday. Now the temperatures right now are starting.
People are slowing down on the Pope all of a sudden. It's like they got to the point where they pretty much know. I'll find more, don't worry.
In a moment, we're
Here
going
we
to
go.
speak with Nora O'Donnell, who had a historic interview with the Pope last year, the first wide-ranging interview with an American broadcast journalist. That was she. But first, Chris Lipsey is with us from Rome. He's on the ground there. Chris, good morning. What are you seeing? What are you hearing?
Good morning, Tony. Well, as you mentioned, those bells were tolling for the death of Pope Francis. Now, St. Peter's Square is just filled with a deafening silence as faithful flock here by the hundreds, perhaps thousands, to mourn the passing of Pope Francis. It is in stark contrast to the scenes of joy that we witnessed here just yesterday for what turned out to be the final appearance of Pope Francis on. Less than 24 hours ago, it was Pope Francis making a comeback. Dear brothers and sisters, happy Easter, he said. Notably absent were any oxygen tubes, as he rode in the Pope Mobile a mere 3 weeks after he was discharged from a 5-week hospital stay for life-threatening double pneumonia. Earlier Sunday, Francis very briefly met with Vice President J.D. Vance, a vocal Catholic. So good to see you. Vance's strict views on border security had clashed with Pope Francis, the world's most vocal champion of migrants.
I know you've not been feeling great, but it's good to see you in better health.
It will go down in history as one of the Pope's last meetings. The Pope, struggling to speak for long periods, used an aide to deliver one of his final messages, a condemnation of policies that stir up contempt for the vulnerable, the marginalized, and the migrants. For Pope Francis, it was the latest in a string of surprise appearances. An 88-year-old who was still under strict doctor's orders to rest and avoid large crowds. Instead, here he was on Palm Sunday, surrounded by 20,000 people. and again on Holy Thursday visiting a prison. It was a drum roll leading up to Easter Sunday, an appearance too holy to miss that turned out to be his last.
Just last night, Tony, I was having dinner with a close aide of Pope Francis, and when I asked him his reaction to all these surprise appearances of Pope Francis, given his frail condition, he told me Pope Francis wants to die on the battlefield. It's a remarkable thing, Chris. You know, it's not shocking, the news today, because he had been so ill, but it is shocking in the sense that we saw him just yesterday. Many newspapers have his picture on the front today. Also, the timing is interesting, this time of renewal for Christians, the resurrection of Jesus Christ. It's a pivotal moment as you see these final pictures of the Pope. What happens now, Chris? This is incredibly profound timing indeed, Tony. So next, about 8 o'clock local time, his body will be placed in a coffin. He's then going to lie in state for about 4 to 6 days, at which point he will be buried. There's a 9-day period of mourning, which has just begun. And then, of course, there is the conclave, when cardinals from all around the world descend on Rome to elect the next pope. That is going to happen in the next 15 to 20 days, Tony. Chris, thank you.
The 88-year-old Pope led the Roman Catholic Church for 12 years through a series of crises and challenges. He traveled the world and reached out to everyone he met, in particular, people who had often been overlooked or demeaned throughout the Church's long history. CBS News senior correspondent Nora O'Donnell interviewed the Pope last year. She joins us now from Washington. Nora, good morning to you. A lot of people waking up just the way I did with the news that the Pope had passed away. When did you first hear about it? I saw you posted early this morning.
I know. I was up early and saw that news from our team in Rome, learning that the Pope had passed away, and clearly a huge surprise on this Easter Monday. It was just about a year ago when we sat down with Pope Francis, and he gave CBS News the first ever one-on-one interview by a Pope to a U.S. broadcast network. And that conversation was about an hour long. We found him to be warm, smart, giving with his time. And it was an extraordinary moment for him. And it was one more way that he stood out from his predecessors during a papacy that was known for great change and great compassion.
The Holy Father set the tone with his first official act as Pope, reversing a centuries-old tradition. I want to ask you a favor, he said. Before the bishop blesses the people, I ask that you would pray to the Lord to bless me. He named himself after Francis of Assisi, a saint known for his simplicity and humility. The first pope to hail from the Americas, the first Jesuit pope said he wanted a poorer church, one that would include the excluded, rather than living in the lavish papal apartments where popes have lived for hundreds of years. He set an example by choosing to live at the Santa Marta, a simple guest house on Vatican grounds. That's where we met him in April 2024. His desire to reach out to ordinary people sent the bulletproof Pope-mobiles into storage. I cannot greet people from inside a sardine can, Francis famously explained, even if it is made of glass. He'd become one of the most popular public figures in the world, regularly speaking up for the voiceless and leading by example, whether dining with the homeless, washing prisoners' feet, or providing a home in Italy for migrants and refugees fleeing lands torn by war or economic instability. He was a tireless advocate for the rights of migrants, even taking the rare step of delving into a nation's politics when he criticized the Trump administration's plans to deport millions, saying it violated human dignity. The Holy Father pushed for progress in combating climate change, projecting imagery of the crisis on the front of St. Peter's Basilica, and becoming the first pope to issue official Vatican documents on the topic. He reformed the Curia, the central administration of the Church, appointing lay men and women to run Vatican offices, positions historically reserved for cardinals and bishops. During the coronavirus lockdown, he continued to give his public prayers, the People's Pope in St. Peter's Square, with no people. Francis made a daring first ever papal trip to Iraq, despite immense security risks. In the last years of his life, nearly every appearance included prayers for peace in both Gaza and Ukraine.
Can you help negotiate peace?
Rezo mucho, orar.
What I can do is pray. I pray a lot for peace. And also to suggest, please stop, negotiate. A bad deal is always better than an ugly defeat, is it not?
Over time, his papacy began to be defined by a topic he did not choose, the wave of clerical sex abuse scandals that stretched to the very highest levels of the church. He was accused at first of being tone deaf in his slow response to the crisis. But then in 2019, the Pope made sweeping changes to allow for greater accountability and transparency. Francis abolished the top-level confidentiality of pontifical secret.
You have said zero tolerance.
No hay que tolerar.
It cannot be tolerated.
Cuando hay un caso de
When there is a case of a religious man or woman who abuses, the full force of the law falls upon them. In this, there has been a great deal of progress.
A few weeks after we interviewed Francis, it was reported that he used a homophobic slur in 2 private meetings. But in his more than a decade as Pope, he voiced support for bringing the LGBTQ community into the church. That push started aboard a papal flight just months into his tenure. Who am I to judge, he said. While he may have received widespread credit for changing the tune of the church, as one Vatican reporter puts it, the lyrics remain the same. Despite drawing fire from church conservatives for being too liberal, he reaffirmed church doctrine opposing gay marriage, but allowed those in a same-sex union to be blessed. The Catholic rules for pretty much everything from birth control to ordaining women were unchanged. Hailing from South America, Pope Francis's simple style was a product of his humble beginnings. Jorge Mario Bergoglio was born in 1936 in Buenos Aires to an immigrant Italian railway worker and a housewife. As a young man, he lost part of a lung to an infection, worked at menial jobs, and studied chemistry. Ordained at the late age of 32, he made visiting slums and caring for the poor of Buenos Aires a fixture of his ministry. Francis claimed he only brought a small bag to the conclave that elected him because he expected to be going back home to Argentina. Instead, he became one of the oldest popes in history, having traveled to more than 60 countries and keeping a busy schedule until the final days of his life. But he wasn't immune to health issues, using a wheelchair since 2022 and spending weeks in the hospital in 2023. The toll of the papacy, raising persistent questions of retirement after his predecessor, Pope Benedict XVI, resigned, the first pope to do so in almost 600 years.
So you have no plans to resign or retire? I know you don't like this question.
No, diga, sí.
Not at all. Ask all you want. It has never occurred to me.
When you look at the world, what gives you hope?
Todo.
Everything.
Uno ve
You
tragedias,
see tragedies,
pero ve
but you also see so many beautiful
tantas
things.
cosas lindas. Uno ve madres heroicas,
You see heroic mothers,
hombres heroicos,
heroic men, men who have hopes and dreams, women who look to the future.
Eso me da
That gives me a
mucha
lot of
esperanza.
hope.
La gente quiere vivir,
People want to live,
la gente
people
va
forge
adelante,
ahead, and people
la
are
gente es
fundamentally good.
fundamentalmente buena.
Fundamentally good. I believe that too. Nora, I loved his expression when you asked him about retirement. I thought that was priceless. As you said in your piece, he was a pope who made big changes to the papacy. So do you think that made him controversial? Because a lot of people thought that he was more inclusive than many of his predecessors.
That is true, Gail. I mean, Pope Francis was a lightning rod on a number of these issues, but he was also trying to make the Catholic Church more inclusive. You know, there are about 1.4 billion people around the world that say they are Catholic. About 20% of Americans associate with the Catholic faith. But yes, on many of these issues, it caused controversy. But I think at the end of the day, as scholars and those who have studied this church will say, you know, he changed the tune of the Catholic Church, but not the lyrics. But there's still much to say about his legacy, because many of the cardinals that will gather soon in this conclave were appointed by Pope Francis, and they are to, in his model and in his image in some ways, embrace many of the same things. So they are to carry on his legacy, and we'll see how much of the church continues to open its heart, as Pope Francis told me.
You know, Nora, I can't get over some of the decisions he made as Pope, in particular his decision to not live in the apostolic palace, that 12-room apartment, and instead take the 2-room guest house in the hostel, eat his meals with others. It's a lifestyle choice that goes all the way back to his time in Buenos Aires, where he, when he was Archbishop, would cook at home, simple life. He drove a Ford Focus compact car around, none of these big, you know, every aspect of his life, from what he wore to what he ate to where he lived, was humble. Could you talk about that for a bit?
Yeah, I mean, you know, look at what he's wearing. I mean, not the red regal robes that normal popes wear. Instead, the plain white cassock, that silver cross, not a gold cross that we might usually see on cardinals. And that's in part because he was the first in so many ways, not only the first pope from the Americas, but the first Jesuit pope. And I covered that conclave, you know, some 12 years ago, and I had a guess that he might call himself Francis. He's the first pope to be called Francis after St. Francis of Assisi, who is known for his humility and modesty, and that has really been the hallmark of his papacy. And that's in part why the Holy Father spent so much time talking about migrants during his papacy, because he talked about the globalization of indifference. He asked people to think about why migrants leave their home. They are fleeing war, injustice, poverty. And so that is why it's led him to clash with the current administration, but also I think will be one of his defining moments. Tony and Gail.
Really well put.
Thank you, Nora.
Thank you.
All right, let's go back to Rome, or let's go to Rome and talk with John Allen, a longtime observer of the Vatican. He is editor of Crux, a Catholic news website. Good morning.
Good morning, Nate.
So we're all aware of the health complications that Pope Francis was dealing with. Given that, and him defying doctor's orders and making a string of surprise appearances, including Easter holiday yesterday, what was your reaction of the death of Pope Francis?
Well, Nate, I have to admit I was completely astonished. You know, yesterday, watching that scene unfold in St. Peter's Square, where for the first time since that 38-day hospitalization when Pope Francis was battling double pneumonia, we saw him astride the Pope Mobile and making one of those triumphant swings through St. Peter's Square, greeting the faithful who had assembled to see him on Easter Sunday. You know, we all thought this was his triumphant comeback. As it turned out, of course, it was his triumphant farewell. But I think it probably was precisely the way Pope Francis would have scripted his exit. His papacy was all about proximity to the people from beginning to the end. This was a pope who wanted to break down barriers. You know, the Latin term for a pope is Pontifex Maximus, and Pontifex literally means a bridge builder. A ponte is a bridge. And from the beginning to the end, over these 12 years, that was how Pope Francis saw his role. He wanted to build bridges between the Catholic Church and the world outside the Church, between other Christians, followers of other religions, and people of no religious faith at all. He wanted to build bridges in a particular way to those who had been excluded, those who stood on the margins, so the poor and the migrants and the victims of armed conflict. You know, that was, in a sense, his milieu, right? It's where he lived and moved and had his being. And I think it was somehow just symbolically and spiritually apt that a pope who was so, in his heart, in his soul, beholden to being there for the forgotten people of the world, at the very end, and in a way, in defiance of doctor's orders, That's how he went out as well. He leaves behind a remarkable legacy, Nate, and I think today we are only beginning to sort through what it has all meant for the church and for the world.
Yeah, break down barriers, create new norms, and create new bridges. John, please stick around for the coverage that we will continue. Thank you so much.
John, thank you very much. Many of our stations will leave us now, but we will be back with more coverage of the death of Pope Francis on CBS
This is
Morning.
why we rock here, because I will flip you around. We will find you within a few seconds here.
Jennifer tried.
More coverage. Same time.
He didn't get there, so we'll see some upper 60s, low to mid.
Hang tight. We have a lot of news outlets here.
This week, and this is what it looks like right now if you are heading out the door for the city of industry. They're going to add 20 minutes on your drive and a live Caltrans camera right now, both directions of the
Breathing. It could have nothing to do, for all we know, it could have nothing to do with blood clots. We have absolutely no idea. When will we sort of have a better idea?
I'm really glad you made that point, Charlie, because I don't know. I was going over the possibilities. I think the most likely one is it's tied to that pneumonia that was getting better and the asthma attacks that he had. That's most likely. Now, when will we know? Vatican protocol used to have this way of declaring death. They used a silver hammer where they had, in this case, it would be Kevin Farrell. Bishop Farrell would have knocked on his head 3 times and called out his name. And if he didn't respond, they declared him dead. Believe it or not, the Vatican got rid of the hammer. They don't use the hammer anymore. So now the ritual is you declare, you call out his name, and if he doesn't answer the Pope, you declare him dead. There is no autopsy. There is not going to be an autopsy.
Well, I cannot believe that will be it. Call out his name, he doesn't answer.
That's the protocol. Oh my goodness. That is the protocol.
That's ridiculous.
But obviously beyond that, people are examining him and they're figuring out that, they're figuring out that he really passed, but they don't do an autopsy.
So what I was saying too is when you go out in public, you have a chance of germs. When you have compromised lungs, a cold could be a death sentence, right?
Yeah.
So when you're shaking people's hands, he's going to prison, he's out in public, that's the negative. The positive is it's outdoors. And the outdoors is really that issue cleansing. It is a display of bravery on his part because you don't know. You have no idea.
And that's why it's a display of bravery, but Brian is right too. You're also overexpressing yourself. You already have multiple bacteria. The Italian press is saying that they're calling it pulmonitis in the Italian press and the Rome press, that it's the infection itself that did him in, multiple bacteria. He's exposed to a lot when he goes to a prison or when he goes outside. All of that's true, but he already had the pneumonia to begin with.
It's interesting too, he's not going to be buried at the Vatican. He's going to be at another church.
I want to make another point about healthcare here. I almost forgot. This Pope was committed to friendship and fraternity in the healthcare setting. He was committed to healthcare for all. And I like that spirit of kindness for people that are sick.
Dr. Siegel, thank you. A lot of news this morning. Justice Alito issuing a scathing dissent after the Supreme Court ruled to block the Trump administration's deportations under the Alien Enemies Act. Those details next.
So we're going to find more on the Pope.
Right here.
We're actually going to go to EWTN, is the Catholic network.
At Freedom.
And see if they cut in on the regular scheduled programming or not.
Deliver us from evil. Amen. Saint Michael, glorious Prince, Chief and Champion of the heavenly hosts, Guardian of the souls of men, Conqueror of the rebellious angels, Steward of the palace of God, under our divine King Jesus Christ, our worthy leader, endowed with superhuman excellence and virtue, vouchsafe to free us from all evil, who with full confidence have recourse to thee, and by thy incomparable protection enable us to make progress every day in the faithful service of our God. Amen. Let us pray. Pray for us, most blessed Michael, Prince of the Church of Jesus Christ, that we may be made worthy of his promises. Almighty and eternal God, who in thine own marvelous goodness and pity didst forelay common salvation.
That's right,
The mayor of
BBC.
Bethlehem, a Christian himself, and
BBC
he
News
said
now.
how
There we
Pope
are.
Francis was really seen as being a friend of the Palestinian people, one of the few leaders in the world, he said, who was supporting Palestinian rights, and he hoped the next pope would take up similar positions.
Yolanda, thank you very much for that. With me here in the studio, still Rich Preston, who's keeping across the latest developments around the world for us, and Jorge Perez from BBC Mundo, because of course, as we know, Pope Francis, the first Latin American Pope, and in the region now it's, what is it, Argentina, it's coming up to 8:30, so whilst we've been on air, it's been quite early in the morning, but now people will be awake there and absorbing the news. What reaction have we got?
Yeah, we have been hearing reactions from other officials in Latin American governments. The foreign affairs ministers of Mexico, for example, was expressing sorrow for Pope Francis' death, and we are, of course, expecting more leaders in the region to react, because this is known as one of the most Catholic regions in the world. I was mentioning you earlier how popular Pope Francis remained despite some issues that were affecting his popularity. We were talking about corruption within religious institutions in the region. We're talking about how the church managed the situation of the sexual abuse scandals that some priests were implicated, and of course this sort of affected not only the popularity of Pope Francis in the region, but also of the Catholic Church. An example could be the same Argentina. In Argentina, when Pope Francis was elected the leader of the Catholic Church, 90% of Argentinians were in support of his of him.
Yeah, I'll continue to bring you coverage on this. I'll just keep channel surfing. I'll bring you more than you can find, probably on your own, honestly.
But of course, you can see
through patience and resilience.
For the region and how the Latin
But I didn't mean to go for over an hour. It's already been a really long live, so just say some prayers. Start hitting that heart button, tapping your screen, sharing this live, letting know you're there, actually absorbing this.
Described him as a great man.
Gonna tap that screen,
Poland's president,
show love for the Pope,
a great apostle of mercy in whom he saw the
share
answer
this with
to the
people,
challenges of the modern
share this
world.
live.
Emmanuel Macron of France describing him as always siding with the most vulnerable and the most fragile. Spain's declared 3 days of national mourning.
Keep flipping through the news channels and seeing, there's never a dull moment here. One of the Catholic channels and so forth. So I would like you all to just kind of tap the screen.
From J.D. Vance, the US Vice President, who's currently on a trip to India.
There we
He
go.
said, "My heart goes out to the millions of Christians all over the world who loved him." Now, it's interesting, we've touched on how the Pope intervened in controversial subjects, and he was highly critical of President Trump during his first term in office and his plans to build a border wall. When he was re-elected, Pope Francis denounced his planned migrant deportations as, quote, a major crisis that will end badly. Now, we did hear from the White House earlier on. They posted on X the message, "Rest in peace," along with photographs of the President and First Lady meeting the Pope. We've not heard anything more from any US officials since then. Rich, thank you very much. Well, once the news broke this morning, people in Rome did head towards St. Peter's Square, and we got to catch up with a couple of them. Let's take a listen.
I was sort of really shocked because I was here yesterday at Mass and I saw the Pope and he looked just so fragile, you know?
Moments of a bit of sadness and at the same time thankfulness and celebration of life.
It's a great disappointment, a great loss. A man who has innovated the church and a man who has left a great mark. And this absence causes great pain.
Great
Somebody calling on
Great
the
emotion,
phone.
great emptiness, yes. We will miss him.
Eddie, Apostolos talks about all the wars in the world. Ukraine, Burma, and even Gaza. I'm so sad.
We can hear some of those voices. Want to hear now from Catholic historian and author Michael Walsh. Michael, thank you very much for coming on the programme. We've got the sense there of the different emotions of people coming. Clearly the news still quite raw, just a few hours old. How do you reflect on it?
Well, this is a very, very sad day, indeed. Pope Francis had really changed our conception of the papacy. Those also Catholics, and in fact possibly changed the conception of the papacy around the world. It's been a powerful force, particularly for migrants, as I think has just been mentioned, and for the poor, and also for putting to sympathy. A lot of Catholic women think he hasn't been firm enough about the role of women in the church. One of the first things he did, which scandalized people, frankly, was on Monday, Thursday to wash the feet of women, which no pope had done before.
And let's stick with some of those issues then. Gay rights, the role of women. How do you think he navigated it? Because clearly he was heavily criticised from both sides of the debate on both issues.
Well, yes, you can't please everybody all the time, of course. And I mean, most famously, he said when tackled about, and was on a plane at the time, it was tackled about the place of gay people in the church, gays in the church, and he said, who might have judged, which was very unlike any of his predecessors, I must say. They wouldn't have said anything like that.
And what about his handling the child sex abuse scandal that he inherited, but then he felt should have gone further and done more?
Yes,
You guys make sure and tap the screen, like this live, share it, comment, let me know you're watching, let me know you're there.
But in fact, maybe it's the job of the bishops, the local church.
I'm running for over an hour now here.
But he did invest. I mean, I think.
Jump from different channels.
I think his
Catholic, I'm Catholic myself, so I know the Catholic channels. We'll do the British news and then some American news, etc. So.
And let's look at
But I'd like you to tap that screen.
Remembered. The image that he
Show your
certainly wanted to
support.
project was one of simplicity, humility, and care and concern for
Make
the
sure and
most vulnerable.
subscribe too, because I'm gonna have a lot of things papal and keeping up on the Pope here. It's obviously breaking news now, but you go to my channel, you'll see I was hitting it first, man. I mean, I was on there pretty close to right after it happened. So, for all things, I like to be first and get them to you right away. It's like I did Trump's attempted assassination. Then a few seconds, I had that up on my channel, so make sure and subscribe and keep yourself in the loop.
But in a guest house in the Vatican grounds. All matters, I think, change the way we think of the papacy. I don't imagine we're going to go back to the old autocratic, dictatorial kind of papacy. Not in the near
So St.
future
Francis the Pope passed away. He died today.
Thank you very much.
It's odd and eerie. Easter Monday. But he was very ill, and they're saying because he went around so many people, went against doctors' orders, he got sick, got pneumonia. As it was, he only had one lung, so.
Paris in France, people gathering there. And now let's take a look at the flags being lowered at half-mast, the Vatican embassy there.
I'm going to go to the embassy and the Vatican at the same time.
Is now standing by for us, our correspondent in central London. Sam, just talk us through where you are there.
We're stood outside Westminster Cathedral here. There have been several services that have already taken place this morning. We've been speaking to...
So as you tap that screen, let's get some likes going on here so that more people are able to see if this live is going. Share this live out. Another way people can see.
That Pope Francis has died at the age of 80. It's a massively poignant and powerful moment for people to walk through these grand doors behind me to attend an Easter Monday Mass here, whilst hearing the news that Pope Francis has passed away.
Timing is just eerie.
The flagpole just behind me, the Vatican state flag going up at half-mast.
Those medically makes sense. The doctor said not to go around that many people, and he did it anyway.
It's just been a chance for people to come and reflect in their own personal way on the papacy of Pope Francis. We've spoken to people from around the world here this morning. A lady from Argentina told us of the immense sorrow that her country will feel at this loss, which I think speaks volumes.
Don't cry for me, Argentina.
Francis was. He was an international figure, taking international Catholicism into a globalized world. He was the first Latin American pope and the first from outside Europe for over 1,000 years. You get a real sense of that here. We've spoken to a number of people from different nationalities who have attended those services this morning. What we'll see later in the day is a special service being put on here at Westminster Cathedral at around 5:30. Something called a Requiem Mass will take place. This invites members of the congregation, mourners here, to pray for the soul of Pope Francis. We are expecting that congregation to be much larger than what we've seen here this morning, but certainly this is just a place for people to come to reflect, to gather, a focal point for the Catholic community here in the centre of London at Westminster Cathedral, which is the largest Roman Catholic church in England and Wales.
Okay, Sam, thank you for that. Right, in the studio with me, Rich Preston and Jorge Perez, keeping across the latest developments. And Rich, just want to bring you the latest from the Vatican that we have about the process of what happens next, which is basically saying there's a declaration of death and the placing of the body in the coffin at 8 p.m. tonight. That is the latest update from the Vatican on the logistics of what happens next. Wider than that, the reaction, what else have we got? Well, I just want to remind you of what we heard from here in the UK earlier on today. Lewis, Prime Minister Keir Starmer said, "I join millions around the world in grieving the death of His Holiness Pope Francis. His leadership in a complex and challenging time for the world and the Church was courageous, yet always came from a place of deep humility." We also heard from the King, who of course recently met alongside the Queen, the Pope, on their visit to Italy. He said, "My wife and I were most deeply saddened to learn of the death of Pope Francis. Our heavy hearts have been somewhat eased, however, to know that His Holiness was able to share an Easter greeting with the Church and the world he served with such devotion throughout his life and ministry." Now, what's interesting, Lewis, is of course seeing the reactions that come from out with the Catholic community. Iran earlier today offered its condolences. A spokesperson for the Foreign Ministry saying, "I offer my condolences to all Christians around the world." That's from an Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman. As I say, we heard from the Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas saying that Pope Francis was a great supporter of the Palestinian people. Israel's President Isaac Herzog saying that Francis saw great importance in fostering strong ties with the Jewish world. And in terms of what different countries are doing to honour Pope Francis, Spain, 3 days of national mourning there. Argentina, 7 days of national mourning. Austria is flying black flags from clerical and religious buildings. Lights will go off later today at the Eiffel Tower. And in Jerusalem on Wednesday, we heard from Yolande Nell earlier on, there will be a special memorial mass on Wednesday at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Rich, thank you for that. And what about the reaction
in Latin America.
Still waiting for some of the leaders in the region to react. It's still very early in Central America, for example, in Mexico. It's still before 6 a.m. The most important came from Argentina's President Javier Milei, saying that he expressed his sorrow for what happened, recognizing that he had some differences with Pope Francis in the past, but that now he sees them as minor differences, and he was recognizing the importance of Pope Francis not only in Argentina, but also in the region.
Jorge, thank you very much for that. Well, following the death of Pope Francis, Buckingham Palace issued a statement from King Charles and Queen Camilla. The King said, "My wife and I were most deeply saddened to learn of the death of Pope Francis. His Holiness will be remembered for his compassion, his concern for the unity of the Church, and for his tireless commitment to the common causes of all people of faith." And the Queen and I remember with particular affection our meetings with His Holiness. We were greatly moved to have been able to visit him earlier this month. We send our most heartfelt condolences and profound sympathy. So those words from the King, echoing the sentiments of so many world leaders, of course, right around the world. And we've been getting the thoughts and analysis of experts around the world as well. And a little earlier, we heard from Joel Hodge, Head of Theology at the Australian Catholic University in Brisbane.
Shock, sadness, the loss of a great spiritual man and leader. Obviously, a lot of people thought that he was improving, out of hospital and coming back to us, and seeing him at the Vatican and St. Peter's over the Easter period. So there was hope that he was on the path of recovery. So a lot of surprise and just sadness at the loss of such a great leader and man of faith.
And just talk us through that man of faith. He was a man of firsts in so many ways in that role.
He was indeed a man, firstly, who became Pope not after the death of a Pope, but after the resignation of a Pope. So that was quite extraordinary in and of itself. And then the first South American, Latin American pontiff and Argentinian, a man with an Italian background and a grasp of Italian, of course, so he knew the Italian culture and could work with that context and environment, but coming very much from the outside of that too. So, and with that different perspective, the perspective of the Latin American world and that great concern for the poor, for the migrant, his family being a family of migrants, but also, yes, a great man of spiritual insight and depth. He was the first Jesuit to be a pope from that great religious congregation that St. Ignatius of Loyola started 500 years ago. And he brought that spiritual depth and framework to the papacy, particularly in terms of discerning the church's way forward around governance and other matters. So he brought so many beautiful gifts to the church, which are going to be missed.
Joel, we've had tributes, of course, from around the world. I just want to read this one, and I'll just get your thoughts off the back of it, if I may, because I'm sure they will reflect the feelings of so many. This is from the former Archbishop of Canterbury here in the UK, Justin Welby, saying this: "It is with a deep sense of personal sadness that I mourn the death of my friend, His Holiness Pope Francis. With our Roman Catholic brothers and sisters, along with the global church, and many more around the world, I'm filled with a great sense of loss. He was a Pope who spoke not just to the Catholic Church, but far beyond it. His leadership was felt powerfully among us in the Anglican community. From the very first days of his papacy, he was an example of humility. He constantly reminded us of the importance of serving the poor, always standing with those who face persecution and hardship. During my time as Archbishop of Canterbury, it was a great privilege to work with him in peace building, not least in South Sudan. Over the years, he became a friend, and I will miss him deeply. His commitment to walking together as Roman Catholics and Anglicans, for his vision, passion for working for ever greater reconciliation and unity between all Christian denominations, I am profoundly grateful. I give thanks to God for his life and his faithful servant of Christ. May he rest in peace and rise in glory." I just want to pick up that one line there where he says he was a representative of the church, of course, but, quote, far beyond it. And that idea of having a presence right around the world, expanding out beyond Catholic and Christian communities.
He was a singular global figure. He drew the attention of just so many people in not only what he said, but how he said it, what he did, the manner of his life. He was a great exemplar of the Christian life, of a great servant of the church. He loved Jesus. He loved the way of Jesus, that way of love, and he just exemplified that in his simplicity and in his humility, and exemplified by his name, Francis, taking that name, which no other pope had taken before, in honor of Francis of Assisi, in giving that way of simplicity, of humility, of poverty, of dedication to Jesus and the church. And that resonated not only with Catholics, but with so many Christians and so many non-Christians. And he was a man that reached out to people of other churches and of other faiths. That was very much part of his agenda, so to speak, of his charism. And particularly to the Muslim world. He went just recently to Indonesia, to our part of the world, and visited, the most populous Muslim country in the world. And that visit was such a striking visit, I think, and a great visit of peace, of interfaith relations. And he did that with other Muslim leaders too. So he will be very much missed, not just by Catholics, but by other Christians and non-Catholics around the world, just by the kind of things that he exemplified, the type of person he was. The world is poorer for the loss.
We're just there too, Joel Hodge with his reflections. Just want to take you live to Buenos Aires now. Of course, Pope Francis was the first Latin American leader of the Roman Catholic Church, a hugely significant appointment back in 2013 when it was made, and still hugely significant right now. We can speak to BBC Mundo's correspondent in Buenos Aires, Veronica Smith. Veronica, just talk us through the reaction there.
Well, people woke up this morning, are still waking up, it's very early here, to the news, and absolutely shocked. I mean, it's just weeks ago that people were praying for his health, and he seemed to be so close to death so many times, and yet he survived. People saw images of him yesterday during Easter Sunday, and I don't think anybody expected